What is going on, friends? Welcome in to a long anticipated episode for me and Cease, because we haven't done one together in a minute. So welcome back. Welcome to the flow of things. I'm excited to be back. Cease, how are things with you? And
am I already frozen?
You could be. I don't think you are. Not on my end.
Okay,
It would, but I mean, it would be poetic if you were, just with,
So right now my screen is frozen to the little intro that says the word science, and everything is just stuck like that.
Well, hey, at least it landed on science and not the theology one.
Right.
So you don't have to stare at that. Well, hey, I mean, if you need to, maybe if it's not completely frozen, back out, come back in, and I will go over a few announcements while we get ready for the episode.
As long as I'm not frozen your end, I'll just wait to see if it comes undone on mine, and if not, sure. I'll restart.
Of course. Did we get to touch upon your Talk Heathen appearance? I can't remember. It's been so long.
No, we didn't talk about it.
Awesome.
It was good. It was definitely not something that I am used to, like taking call-ins, although I would love to do that with this show at some point.
Yeah.
But it was definitely, I was really grateful for the opportunity, and I think we got some good callers and a good conversation between me and the co-host there. Objectively, Dan, we had a good conversation about morality and that sort of thing.
Sure.
And yeah, so hopefully I'll get to do it again at some point.
Yeah, I got to enjoy seeing that. I do wish that the calls were geared in because I know specifically what would have made for really good calls had they been on certain topics, that things that even we haven't gone over on the show.
Sure.
I did like your kind of conversation. I think you and Dan at the beginning went over morality for a little bit there at the beginning before calls. But yeah, no, that was great to see you on, and hopefully there are more. Sorry while I eat candy and be rude on air, but
no worries.
So I need the audience to let me know if there's any popping sound in the audio, because I've heard it on and off since I've been doing StreamYard the last time that I was on live. I ended up having to restart it.
So I'm no.
Yes, it is. It's on your end, actually. It's gone.
That's so weird.
Anyway, sorry. Bear with us on our technical difficulties. It's been a while since we've been back, but we got a good episode for you today. We're going to basically go over a discussion/debate that I had, I was going to say, about like a week or so ago. I've been working a new job, so hard for me to remember what days of the weeks it is, because I basically am up China time as opposed to my normal time when I was doing a normal hour job. So hopefully we can not have any of those audio issues through the show and go over it. I do want to add a few kind of notes before we get into it on what this kind of was supposed to be and not supposed to be. It wasn't really a debate, I guess. I went into it thinking it was, and then I was told it was more of a discussion, which is perfectly fine. It still is sectioned out like a debate in terms of opening statements, things like that. I don't typically get involved on the high end of physics like Leo or perhaps maybe even CJ does. That's not really my forte as much. So I went in this with a little bit more time to research that type of stuff. Yet when he had his opening statement, he went into things that I didn't expect, which I thought made for a conversation that I was actually more prepared for, which was good in one sense. But in the other, I kind of just, there's no disrespect to him, but I kind of failed to understand the point of a lot of the discussion about fine-tuning when it relates back to morality. And then he had some kind of a priori considerations about a necessary being with great making properties, if I heard him right, where it seemed that it was kind of pointless to talk about fine-tuning if you just get me to accept some a priori consideration for God. It seems that I just deductively believe that. And so there was points in there where I was a little confused. I'm wondering if when I hear it back, that I jumped the gun on that. And so if I did, kind of go over that. But mainly I want to use this to kind of get Cease's opinion on things that Travis says, the things I say, as well as the audience. If something you think anybody, whether it's me or Travis, that said something that's just not right, or you could add your own 2 cents, please do, and we'll try to talk about it in the comments. But that whole fucking long-winded shit out of the way, just wanted to kind of throw some ground rules down on where we went into this and my opening statement. I was very thrown off when I had to give my opening statement. I was like, okay, I guess we're talking past each other right now. But and also, it's going to sound like me and Travis did a bunch of cocaine. I sped the video up. So we're going to talk really fast. so we're not on drugs.
Process what's being said.
If not, I can slow it down. I did it for the sake of time.
Sure.
If anyone wants me to turn it down, I will. I listened to like 3 seconds of it and was like, yeah, it's pretty fast. No audio?
No, I don't even see it on the screen.
No worries. Oh, it's because I didn't add it.
There we go.
All right, how about now?
You guys just
audio.
Can talk about your ideas and.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, you heard the audio?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, because I felt like I didn't check it, so good. Sure.
Do that for like maybe 25 minutes or something like that, and then let the audience ask some questions to both of you guys. And Travis, why don't you go ahead and get us started, and then Jmike and I will just sit back and listen to you, and I'll probably take some notes.
Okay, sounds good. I'll go ahead and start. Okay, so what I'm wanting to do is present a somewhat novel approach to the fine-tuning argument, using a combination of arguments from Hugh Ross and Richard Swinburne through a lens of theistic idealism, using principles in the philosophy of science, and see if we can kind of look at this in a more illuminating and testable way that can help us form an inference to the best explanation. The fine-tuning data suggests that the universe may have been designed not just for any kind of life.
Sorry to pause it already. I want to state that the opening statements, I feel like from both of us, were entirely irrelevant to the actual conversation. I just wanted to plant that out before we all know.
Well, he's already said something that's false right off the bat. He said to find go back to the last sentence that he just started.
Richard Swinburne through a lens of theistic idealism, using principles in the philosophy of science, and see if we can kind of look at this in a more illuminating and testable way that can.
Right there?
No, right after that.
Help us form an inference to the best explanation. The fine-tuning data suggests that the universe may have been designed not just for any kind of life, but for embodied moral agents in particular.
Yes, that's kind of where we stick a huge part of the conversation.
Already, that's completely. Yeah. There's no reason. There is no data that suggests that anything was fine-tuned with purpose or intention. Certainly not to create moral beings. So. I mean, even within the lens of theism, the whole point and what we're told over and over again is that we are imperfect sinners. So even there, we don't. Okay, just this is already.
So we spend a lot of time on that, and that's what I mean. Where it's not we don't really get into. And even the host kind of pushes us like, hey, can we get to the fine tuning part? I'm kind of stuck on the whole morality part because I even use you as an example. And I go, well, what about like my co-host Cease, right? Who's a moral naturalist. Like he's just not going to agree with you, even if he granted like fine tuning that there has to be some design behind the fact that moral facts exist or that there's normativity. But anyway.
This idea can be more rigorously tested and established through more detailed comparisons of the fine-tuning data required for the support of the following life forms. 1. Simple life, such as unicellular life that persists for 90 days or less. 2. Permanent simple life, such as unicellular life that persists for 3 billion years or longer. 3. Advanced biological life, including the equivalent of Homo sapiens. 4. Intelligent, consciously self-aware, embodied moral agents capable of launching and sustaining a high-tech global civilization in which morally significant decisions can be made in a moral theater. If the fine-tuning differences dramatically increase with the complexity of successive categories, and if the fine-tuning required for the fourth category is extreme at all levels of cosmic structure, laws of physics, universe as a whole, cluster of galaxies, planetary system, planet, moon, surface of the planet, and life on the planet's surface, then it's reasonable to conclude that the universe exists for a specific purpose, especially if this conclusion can be put to an additional test by determining the comparative degree to which evidence for the fine-tuning demands of the fourth category increases in relation to the others and can demonstrate that any alleged hostility of conditions in the universe are in fact used in the production of the fourth category. Now, to go through some of the data, there are 140 fine-tuned parameters that are necessary for a life-permitting universe, such as, the precision and the fundamental forces that produce heavy elements, things like the mass density of the universe is necessary for heavy elements to build up the life chemistry. It also controls, the precision in the expansion rate, which is what, forms galaxies, stars, planets, and everything. And so these 140 fine-tuned parameters of a life-permitting universe are pretty much well established. And so I'd like to kind of focus more in on how it keeps growing. So in our cluster of...
So he kept kind of going into this whole, they're well established, but I don't know that they are when you have people that contest it, in the field, Sean Carroll, or you had two, you had your brother had a guy on, and I'm pretty sure he kind of was, I don't know that he took a firm stance, but he obviously, it wasn't a situation, at least, where it's painted as like, yeah, this isn't like an inquiry of being, contested.
The problem is that people like this, and I'm sure he's a nice guy. I don't know him, but any person using fine tuning as an argument fails to understand how evidence can be used to support a claim. Like, you can't say we see complexity, therefore that complexity must have been put there by a mind, because nothing about what the science tells us is that complexity requires it. This is the whole concept of naturalism, right? Like, there's nothing special about life. I guess it's true to say that life is a rare event in the universe. That doesn't mean that it's taken place because there was a purpose behind it or a consciousness behind it wanting it to take place. Low probability events happen, and any universe compared to any other universe in some way has a low probability of being what it is. This is just basic math, right? And I don't see any. What do we actually notice when we look at nature? That most places in the universe are either too hot or too cold to actually provide life. The life that does come into existence tends to die, usually horribly. There is disease, there is earthquakes, there are natural disasters of all kinds. Sometimes, some things work out a certain way, and some species are still around. But what was it like? What is the number? Like 99% of all species that have existed have died out, or something?
I've used that figure. I have not checked 100% to make sure that that's true, though. I would assume that the number would be that, right? Based on, at least.
Okay, he has to show, right? So, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. Yeah, I just had a delay, so it was hard for me to make sure.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, like, he has, and this is going back to the basic fallacy of, the watch analogy, right? Like, just because, or the build their analogy, like, just because something that's complex shares a designer, it doesn't mean that all complexity shares a designer. Just like, a watch being created at a certain date doesn't mean that all things that are created were created at a certain date.
Sure.
This is just basic.
One of the things that I tried to do in it was, kind of like, just for the sake of the argument, even in my opening statement, I kind of said, was like, how do we even get to kind of say it's deliberately designed when less than 1 part in 10 to the 50th of the end product is even sustainable for the thing that it was designed for in the first place, right? It's like
Right.
the example I used was like, if you had a factory that produced like sheets of aluminum. I don't know why I always use sheets of aluminum with examples, but I do for some reason. It's like if it's designed to produce sheets of aluminum, but it only produces tens of millions of pounds of anthrax every day, and then like 1 sheet of aluminum every 10,000 years, I don't know that that's anything other than an admission of an extremely fragile design, right? And if it seems to limit the God in some way.
Sure.
It also raises further philosophical implications for me to go, well, when you talk about God being necessary and what explains God this way, I tend to go, well, what explains God about the properties of God that you get this universe as opposed to the other, that he has these desires over the other, right? Seems now it almost, when you add this, for me, I always go to, well, now I don't even know about the statement of God being necessary makes any sense, because we can use this example to say, like, what is it about the properties that have to make it this way, as opposed to like it seems the only way out at that point is like a necessitarian route where it's like you just say it's the best of all possible worlds, or the world that it could, this is just the way it has to be. But that's a whole further.
I was going to say this as well, but it was posted in the comments. So I don't know how attributes. I don't know how the attributes that intention in a way that isn't just ad hoc. Like, yeah, the metaphysical jump from we see complexity or the universe is a certain way to we must have been put that way on purpose. There's no grounds for that. There's no grounds until you can empirically show that a God exists. Otherwise, it's just a narrative. There's nothing about evolution and the way that it functions as a process that needs the assumption of a mind for it to work. So it just, I don't know. It doesn't seem like.
Spartan asks, why couldn't God's desires be brute facts? I mean, I'd have to think, but the first thing I think of is kind of like, well, then what role is libertarian free will playing in some sense, or how do you advocate for that when it's like, if these desires and intentions are just brute and necessary, then again, I feel like the necessitarian might be able to just bite the bullet on that and go, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the whole thesis, but it seems weird to introduce like some agent causation into something whenever now its desires or intentions are entirely brute and it can only act accordingly to such. But
and going back to something my brother said last time that he was on, when I asked him about fine tuning, there are contexts in which the numbers don't add up, where if this was finely tuned, why would it be that we find some of the tuning to be completely overkill or badly tuned for it to have consistent life, for it to have, why is it that it would only be fit for life in one tiny speck of the universe, and even that be mostly a failure?
Mm-hmm.
I guess this is probably where they would start going to, they probably explain things like cancer by saying, well, it's because we have original sin.
Yeah, fall.
Again, I don't want to put it, and which again, my response to that is anybody can make claims.
Well, so so that actually pushes the realm when you make those things. I've had kind of new thought about that, where it's something that's actually kind of boggled my mind before I got into any philosophy, but when I realized I was an atheist, was this idea from imperfection from perfection, like even just introducing the fall, right? Like the idea that you have some perfection and then along the way it arises some imperfection seems to just be an extremely hard concept for me to grasp.
Yeah, it seems contradictory,
right? It seems that there's just no way out of the obvious contradiction, but that's a whole separate thing. There's actually a really good point that Oppie talks about with that. Some discussion I had heard that's interesting, but anyway, we'll get back on track here. I asked some people in the comments, for people who are watching in the future, I asked if we should just skip to the meat of it, and majority of the people said yes. So we'll skip the openings. You can go back and do that. We're doing this for the sake of time. That way we don't have to do like 2, 3, 4, 5 parts. Maybe we can just keep this a 2-parter because we still need to go back on the Kalam video.
Yeah.
So
dude, that's their channel, by the way, not to go off topic, but they produce so much nonsense so quickly. Like, they were giving us so much free content to go over.
Sure, that's great. I love it.
I mean, I don't want to like obsess about those guys too much because it's kind of a waste of time. But it is important, I think, sometimes to expose some of that. And it's so funny because I'll see in the comments things like, remember Sabor, that guy that you talked to?
Yeah.
They think of him as like an intellectual giant. Like somebody actually wrote that in one of the comments, and I started laughing. It's just
the guy who was telling me I was a metaphysical naturalist. I was like, I might get there one day, but I'm not currently. I was like, I don't know why
who doesn't know the difference between methodological naturalism
and
there
was an entire paper that they went over, and it wasn't even in the paper. But anyway, yeah, I definitely wanted to jot some things down so we'd have I track kind of my thoughts, since there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and I'm glad you did. It allowed me to take a break.
All right. Well, how do you guys want to continue? Do you guys want to just go ahead and, for example, Travis, ask some questions to Jmike really quick, or Jmike, do you want to get started? How do you guys want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, Travis, I guess if it would be fair to you, since you're making kind of the claim that it does lead to the explanation of God, I guess my first question I would want to ask you is, what are the conditions at which life can exist, and how do we know that with just a single sample size?
Okay, so I noticed like a lot of your objections kind of come down to this this thing of like sample size, like we don't have other universes to measure it.
So I've got to pause because there wasn't he kind of says that a lot. He also says it seems that my hang up on not believing God has to do with the argument from divine hiddenness, which I think it's a good argument. I think it's a great argument, but it's not a really big contention. There was a lot of things that he said that I did feel were. I'm gonna mute you for a second because your mic's farting first. Sounds like you're getting tased.
Can
like,
hear me now?
You're good now. Now it's good. Okay.
That was weird.
So I actually
chair.
I just and I want to be fair, Travis. If you want to watch both of our opening statements, go back and watch both of them. They're there. Just type in Jmike Travis debate. It's like the first video. And I'll link it in the description at some point. So in my debate, I listed them out I numbered them in my opening statement. So it wasn't just the sample size, right? That was my first point. 2, it was, I need to know how you calculated that God is more likely than any other potential explanation, right? So a lot of it had to do with probability and how he determined things. And then I asked, what would a falsification criterion look like for a supernatural explanation? And then I asked them, like, why is God restricted to physical constants? And then I want to know why God isn't alternatively fine-tuned for creating black holes, or essentially why. How are we not just like pushing the metaphysical can down the road if I can't posit why God is fine-tuned for some way to create life as opposed to being fine-tuned a different way, which kind of goes back to the statement we were making about God's desires and kind of like why that's the case, or the explanation. Anyway, so I just want to point that out at the beginning because I didn't get that opening statement in there. So I had a lot of questions we didn't actually get to.
It's life permitting. Is that where you're going? I'm trying to understand.
I wouldn't say it's like the biggest contention. I mean, that is a big contention. There's other issues I have. One, to just even say that, okay, this is the case. This is, all we have are these constants. That's it. That's all we can have. I still don't see how it follows that it must be God. That would probably be my actual biggest contention.
Gotcha.
But this is one I want. I think if you make an argument for fine tuning, then you have to at least give what the conditions for what life can exist, and then I have to know in virtue of how you know that without alternatives.
Okay, gotcha. So when we look at things like the fundamental forces and everything, that's what's going to like allow a lot of these heavy elements that build up that are going to form in the nuclear furnace of stars, right? And it's precise such that it forms the life chemistry that we need, and it goes into, eventually forming like galaxies and rocky planets and everything. So, and
I think essentially he's going into like stellar nucleosynthesis, right? Like elements being fused up to like iron. I know.
Yeah, but again, it's irrelevant.
Leo and people in the comments might know a lot of that stuff better. And then planetary disks, all that type of jazz, right? Physics, cosmology. But yeah, I was kind of like, it didn't seem like you're going to the right spot. Anyway, sorry, you wanted to say something?
No, again, he wants to talk about likelihood of these events taking place, or the complexity of these forces coming together in a certain way to produce a certain kind of result. Again, none of that suggests intention. He hasn't bridged the gap there. He's just assuming the metaphysics, and the problem with doing that is that he lacks the methodology to show why the best explanation isn't a different one. He's just saying, I can't imagine this coming together unless it was intended to be the case. Therefore, God is the best explanation. That's not an argument.
Well, he does elucidate a little further on the point, but I'd like to see what you think even more so on that.
But if the variables were off, you don't get a life permitting universe. So,
beg the question.
Okay, who cares?
It's pretty uncontroversial that the constants have to be right in order for a life permitting universe. And as far as I know, like carbon based life is the only kind of.
So I asked him, what would the conditions be, and so let me just ask you, did it not sound like he just begged the question and restated that it has to be this way or something, right?
Well, sure. And it's also,
look at bruteness, but he didn't even say that. He just begged the question.
I mean, and not that it really matters, but there is no reason to assume that that different kind of life couldn't take place. Like, how would we ever know that yes, of course, it would be a different universe. You change the constants, the kind of situation that would arise would be different. I don't know if it necessarily would mean that any kind of life couldn't exist.
Sure.
And someone like Sean Carroll, who I'm not really a big fan of for many reasons, but he shuts that notion down. It's like,
it's funny on a side note. I think like our kind of moral positions are very similar in a way, like you to Sam, to me to Sean Carroll, and that discussion between them two. Every time I listen to it, I'm always like, this really highlights kind of the issues me and Cease have. But I do, I don't think I have the same attitude as a lot of other people where they just shit on Sam like completely and like, he doesn't know philosophy. I don't get that mentality. But anyway, just wanted to point that out. But yeah, so yeah, I also Sean Carroll kind of had similar things about just the Kalam's premises, right? About, look, this isn't just something that's closed shut in cosmology. At least this isn't just some, there's, I think he said I Googled in 30 minutes, like 17 different models that have infinity or something, right? So it's like the problem that kind of bothered me going forward was saying that like, this is the way that it has to be. And then right here's where I give him an example where seems like biologists disagree. People in the comments or you maybe can help me out here. But the last claim he said before I paused it was that seems to have to be carbon-based life.
Of life that can exist.
Okay, so I'm sorry, can I stop you there? Because I have two kind of objections that are relevant to that. One, from my understanding, we do have kind of aspects of biology where we could say silicon or germanium life could be possible. So I'd be curious on that. But more importantly, there does seem to be contention. I had two astrophysicists on my podcast the other day that don't agree with the constants. I don't think Roger Penrose does, if I'm not mistaken, and I know Sean Carroll disagrees. So I would say that it's not as cut dry as you're making it out to be.
Well, what I've heard from astrophysicists is there are certain ways like you can like lower one, but when you lower one, you need increased precision on the other. But here's the thing. My argument is I'm not really so much focused on that as I am, and I kind of wanted to get into this issue of a sample size, because what I'm doing is I'm saying like, look, you have these type of life forms, and we can measure the increasing precision for just like a universe that will permit life. Well, the precision doesn't stop there. It keeps growing until, like, the cluster of galaxies has to be precise. And then we have the precise, like, planetary systems, and then life on the planet's surface. And all these things, the most precision in the universe is for embodied moral agents. And so I kind of wanted to.
So all I heard there, I don't know about you, is that there's all this stuff that's precise that has to happen, and then he just skipped to moral agents. Like, did you hear the same thing I heard? Because that confused me in mid-debate,
Yeah,
where I was like, I feel like he's setting a shift up to talk about something else, is what it felt like.
He is, but also he's done nothing to ground why the constants having to be what they need to be to create the certain results that we can observe. Why is that best explained by intention rather than being just the case or some naturalistic explanation that results in these events? It doesn't follow that way. Like, it can be. I see no reason.
Well, I mean, it doesn't logically follow, like, in any way, to just describe, like, it has to be personal creator or something like that.
But it's worse than that, because it's also, there's no observation that we can make in the world that shows why complexity has to be designed. Like, that is still the assumption. Until you can empirically verify that a mind separate from the body exists with these intentions, this is just a story that theists are telling themselves. Forget exactly where I was going with this, but it just seems to me that he's just the brute fact of the constants result. Like, obviously, if you change the constants, you get a different universe. Of course you do. Like, that's by definition. You change the constants, you get a different result. But how does that suggest intention, design, purpose, God? All the metaphysics is all up in the air. Like, you don't get to the point by just pointing to the constants being different.
Well, and I asked them, or during the debate, this is my opening statement, was like, what it means to, like what it means to rule out possible worlds with different constants, or like what it would mean if we looked at, like, the mass of a neutrino, like the electron, a muon, tau neutrinos, like the mass, or the ratio of the masses between them, right?
Actually, here's a good example that you could just. Sorry, were you going somewhere?
Well, yeah, just real fast. And he I don't know if he addressed if we talk about it or if it was just in my opening statement, but I said it seems that the mass is, like, entirely arbitrary. It just kind of needs to be close to zero. But what matters essentially is kind of the ratio between, right, the electron, muon, tau, neutrinos, if I'm correct. And so I was kind of curious on, like, what he means by the fact that you change a constant in one way, where I'm like, well, because if I change the mass of it and I'm just stating that it's arbitrary, but it just needs to be close to zero, but the ratio between the masses, have to have some, fine structure to it, or however he or I want to word it. What that even means, because to me, I'm like, it seems that you could change that, and then I don't really know what we're talking about at that point, because then it's saying we are changing constants. But from your perspective, you're kind of just saying, it's essentially the same thing, but that you're just going to result with a different end result. Whereas I'm saying, how do we even know that it changes an end result, or has a big effect, or doesn't just have some kind of ratio between constants or things like that are.
I think it depends on what constant you're changing, right? Like, there are some things that maybe wouldn't change that much, and there are things, but by definition, it would be a different universe. Just logically.
Sure. Yes. I guess if you looked at every particular and you were to say, well, the ratio between these masses are different, therefore, it
was still being
technically a different. Yeah, it's not a one.
But okay. But so here's the example I was going to give. Imagine just the idea of erosion, right? Like, you have I don't know, like a cliffside, and you have water hitting the rocks for centuries, and at some point part of the rock falls off and goes into the water. Are you telling me that because that series of events, that sequence of events, for it to happen, had to happen in a very specific way, that there was purpose behind a chain of events, that God is sitting there deciding, it is in my purpose and design that I'm gonna call, like, what would be the point of causing the erosion of a mountain? Like, you're saying that every little part of everything that's going on, every event is just, there was some purpose behind it?
Well, it's even further, right? It's like, why is God limited by physical constants? Like, if we just ask ourselves a question like, what would you expect in a naturalist world versus a God world, which might
that's the other thing, right?
Which might not, that people might go, well, you beg the question by doing that. It's like, I get that, but at the same time, I don't know why you would want to say, for your point, that God must make the mass of a neutrino or the ratios between them a certain way, when it seems to me he could just make it like the mass of a basketball, right? And like, just like that wouldn't matter. But if you say it does, then I go, why is God limited now in some way? Why are you, like, all you did was insert? It's an admission of limitations on the entity at which you propose, because you're saying it has to do this some certain way. Whereas I'm going, to the hell with physical things. Why? What the fuck does God care about molecules or what atoms are even doing? It seems like just an admission of weird limitations.
Well, they want to have it both ways, right? Like, they want to say that for things to be what they are, you need certain physical constants. Oh, but not for God, because God is non-physical. And God, when we observe minds and we see that they're dependent on brains, at least as far as we know, but not God's mind. So God can have will, can have intention, can have purpose, can impact the physical world, all at the same time being a non-physical entity, which is, again, it's the mind-body problem. Like, how could one interact with the other? Why would one need to interact with the other? Why would there be any need for a physical reality in the first place?
Yeah. And CJ actually makes a really good point. If God wanted, God, I have to read it from the chat because it's on my screen. It's tiny. If God wanted to, he could make electrons conscious and we wouldn't need all the constants. So it's not clear why you should think that God needed to operate with the constants. Yeah. It's like, kind of like, why don't you make the substrate, right, itself?
Bradley also said something.
The end goal in the first place. Yeah.
How does a finely tuned universe imply anything other than the necessity of the physical constants themselves? That's right. That's what I'm saying. All it shows is that for things to be a certain way, you need certain constants. Now, whether those constants have gotten there through natural processes, random or otherwise, or it's because some God made it that way, he certainly provided no argument to move one closer to one way or another.
Sure. All right, let's get back.
The sample size. That's why I say let's look at the comparative degree to which the evidence for the fine tuning jumps from things like unicellular life. It's like simple bacteria, then more bacteria that like grows in oceans and lakes and everything that can survive for 3 billion years or longer. Well, the precision keeps growing when we get into the evolution of Homo sapien, or the equivalent of Homo sapiens. And then it's even further for intelligent, consciously self-aware, embodied moral agents to have the intelligence and capacity to launch a global civilization to make morally significant decisions. So the precision in the universe accumulates in morality and moral agents. And so that's the trajectory of my argument, more than just
skipped way to morality, but I kind of want to see at least what the response is. Sure.
Constants.
Okay, so I would have a probably even bigger objection because I'm a moral anti-realist. So I think that there's an issue with looking at the natural world in any aspect and declaring that you've somehow discovered normativity. I don't think that. So I'd have an issue there. Maybe we set that. That was one of the first questions I wanted to ask you too, with the whole moral aspect of it.
Okay.
But to go kind of back first, it seems.
Can you replay that last exchange?
I think I went way back.
Homo sapiens. And then it's even further for intelligent, consciously self-aware, embodied moral agents to have the intelligence and capacity to launch a global civilization to make morally significant decisions. So the precision in the universe like accumulates in morality and moral agents. And so that's the trajectory of my argument, more than just the constants.
Okay, so I would have a probably even bigger objection because I'm a moral anti-realist. So I think that there's an issue with looking at the natural world in any aspect and declaring that you've somehow discovered normativity. So I already know you have contention with that. We'll set me and your arguments on that for aside for now. So anybody who's new, you can go back in the archive and check out me and Cease's heated discussions on morality, but we still need to finish and go, which we will. We're understanding kind of each other's positions better, and so they'll be more fruitful as they go. But yeah, so did you want that to keep playing, or did you?
No. I'll just say real quick. There's absolutely nothing about observing the capacity to make moral decisions that requires, again, the assumption. I'll say the same thing I said about this idea of precision. There's nothing about these phenomena that requires the assumption that there's a God putting anything in place, or that there is an intention that puts any of this in place. Like naturalism, and I think my approach to understanding morality through a phenomenological lens, looking at the nature of consciousness and the consequences of behavior on states of consciousness. There's nothing about that requires God as an explanation at any point, in any way, shape, or form.
Well, so I'm glad you say that, because that's kind of, I spoke for you in this debate.
Yeah.
So, did you? I'm sorry, did I cut you off? Did you have any further?
No, it's everything that he believes in, like all the things he wants to point to, like complexity, precision, morality. These are all things that I can explain to a naturalistic lens. And the difference is that I have things I can empirically point to. I have a methodology that has the capacity to not just create a narrative or a post hoc explanation, but that can actually make predictions. And he doesn't have the same. He doesn't have that ability because of what supposedly his God is. He doesn't have that empirical basis. He just wants to say, well, here's complexity, therefore God. You don't get to that point. It doesn't follow.
I don't think that. So I'd have an issue there. Maybe we set that. That would probably that was one of the first questions I wanted to ask you too with the whole. I'm sitting there going, maybe we set that aside. And I'm like, no, I can't fucking set that aside. The whole aspect of it.
Okay.
But to go kind of back first, it seems like you said you were a theistic evolutionist, right?
Correct.
So the fear I have is that it seems that now I'm in a game with you where I can't really win because you know, in the process at which I am going to look at, like now, like say the development of the eye or the evolution of the eye, you're always going to have that. There's the designer behind it. Whereas when we're looking at those processes, they're actually happening unguided through natural processes. And so you would have to actually add some new, you know, ontological guiding hand, God, right? Whereas it seems like mine's going to be more parsimonious. You're going to have another assumption. What I mean when I say it seems like I won't be able to win is kind of like the same thing. It was a debate with Malpass and someone, and he kind of got them to admit theistic evolution. And then it was like, there's a point to be made where it's like, I don't know how you win against somebody when you agree there's like this natural process going on, but at the back end, you just always have the God being responsible for it.
It's unfalsifiable. That's the point, right?
Yeah,
it's just a claim.
Like, it just seems like I can never actually win because at every turn you're going to agree up until just the distinction that you think there's the God, but nothing actually within the a posteriori considerations of what we're actually analyzing, right? That indicate which like the intentional part, which is you and, you know, is it Briley or Breeley's main contention, right? It's like and which is mine as well to a degree. It's just, it feels like I'm in a game that I can't win, essentially, right?
And that is exactly why science and religion are in opposition, because of the way, because the claims that those kinds of metaphysical claims are unfalsifiable. Like, no matter what evidence I can provide scientifically for a process being what it is, they can always make the assumption that there is some other thing there guiding it. And they don't need to ever falsify it. It's always just assumed in the reality of what's being observed. And it's like, you're not actually justifying that claim.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and that was a point in the opening statement. I said, it's like, what would the falsification criterion even look? Which is why I don't like opening statements as much. And I'm going to start taking the points of my opening statements and just listing, like, you got to answer these kind of questions specifically, which I didn't know we were going to. This was a free flow discussion, so we didn't really know how it was going to pan out that way. But then even if I go, hey, well, look at the process of evolution, and it's not being, from what we can tell, we don't need to add that extra assumption. But if you're kind of baking that into it, I'm wondering, like, it feels like you're dealing me cards and you know what they are. All like I can never win, almost, it seems. But I don't know if you're following what I'm saying there.
Yeah, I am. Okay. And so when you talk about, positing, more entities to explain the data, I don't think so, because I'm arguing for theistic idealism, which would incorporate all of reality. Like I was saying, like the physics and fine tuning, moral.
So we went from fine tuning. Oh shit. I think
Friends would walk up to me and just be like, "What the f is in your mug?" And I would just tell them, "It's mud."
Yeah, I think you clicked it.
I don't know what I did. So, sorry, guys. Yeah, we went from theistic evolution, or we went from fine tuning to the moral part to like idealism, right? It was so hard for me to keep track on that. Let me find the
universe like accumulates in morality and moral agents, and so that's the
designer behind it. Yeah, right here.
Processes flow in as a byproduct.
Okay, here we go. Cards and you know what they are. All like I don't.
So your point went right over his head, because he says, I don't think that I'm overcomplicating. And he says, because I believe in a theistic idealism that incorporates everything. No, you unless what he means is that he's saying that physicalism or the naturalistic process isn't actually a thing and is all mental. Maybe that's what he means. Mm-hmm. In which case, I would say the same thing. It's like, well, justify that claim.
Yeah, it seems. Yeah, exactly. It's like from my perspective, now you're dealing with another set of ontology, right? Like what the substrate of like fundamental material is, whether physical or mental. And as far as I'm concerned, now it's some other kind of substrate that I don't feel we have access to, because that comes at the back end of like an evolutionary process of minds developing, right? Not like at the forefront of the argument, so that to me, it just bakes in a lot of things that was a little confused. Like what? Almost, it seems, but I don't know if you're following what I'm saying there.
Yeah, I am. Okay. And so when you talk about, positing, more entities to explain the data, I don't think so, because I'm arguing for theistic idealism, which would incorporate all of reality. Like I was saying, like the physics and fine tuning, moral agency, which we'll put to the side, laws of mathematics, logic, and things of that sort. It's going to unify all of these. And a good way to look at, God bringing things about by natural processes is like, let's say I want to raise my hand, right? So I have the intention to raise my hand, and there's neural firings and muscle contractions that happen as a byproduct of me just intending to raise my hand. Sure. So likewise, I think God intends to bring about moral agency, and then these natural processes flow in as a byproduct. And so I think I'm putting a pretty.
He just says that he thinks that's the case. I mean, there's nothing me and you have to even elucidate or even drive the point home further of what he's saying, as the fact that
I'm just going to keep saying the same thing. It's like these are just claims.
He's just made the restated the
simple
claim.
Unifying explanation after.
Sure, but so I'm worried it like begs the question in the sense of that it's not. It wouldn't answer my initial question to say, like, especially with the sample size, because a moral realist or a moral naturalist, right, they're just going to disagree with you and say that yes, normativity exists in the world. There are moral facts. There are moral obligations, and they might even actually posit the fact that generally in theism, at least in philosophy, it's more under subjectivism than it is under objectivism, and so they're going to make that argument. So I guess my issue is you still haven't really shown that this is the only case that it could have some endowment of like normativity or moral obligations. It seems that begs the question for the moral naturalist or someone to say, yeah, that could exist without God. Why is that? Why do you need why does unicellular life to I think the word you used specifically was, I don't want to get it wrong, endowing with moral agency or something like that.
Not quite, but
embodied moral agents or something like that, right? Was that it?
Yeah, it's more than just it's intelligent, embodied moral agents, who have the capacity to like take these things, and they, like the even the biodeposits throughout, the 4.56 billion year history of the Earth is precise to make a civilization in which these morally significant decisions can be made. Now, I understand you're not sympathetic to moral realism, but that's
I'm kind of arguing. So I'm kind of taking
it's not really controversial.
Well, so I'm taking myself out of my shoes as a moral anti-realist, right? So like my co-host on my show sees he's a moral realist. He would argue, right? No, that doesn't prove the God or that there's a creator behind it, because I believe in those things. I believe in moral obligations. I believe in normativity from that process, but I don't add God to it, right? So we're still back to the initial question, which is how do you go from declaring that with one sample size? Because is it logically contradictory to say that those things could exist without God?
No, you can posit it.
So two things. One, would that be a fair? I know it wouldn't be probably the best way to steel man it with talking about maybe your views on normativity. We can worry about those fine details.
Well, I thought that was a great response.
Okay, so that would be a position that you obviously would hold with you. I mean, obviously you don't take the creator entailment, but I mean, essentially, what your argument, or not your argument, what the argument I would pose to him is kind of the same thing we've just said the whole time, is what's the logical entailment. But I want you to tell me if at any point that answer comes, because I'm not convinced that it does.
But I forget I'm not so stuck on the logical entailment, because I don't, like I said to you before, I don't think logic is the only tool to talk about what could be the case when observing reality. I think it's an important one, but it's not the only one.
Well, sure, but you would agree with like the set of inference rules that normativity exists, therefore God, right, is not like there's no set of inference rules.
There's no connection there
without affirming the consequent or without.
But also, like, okay, which would be fine if at least we had some empirical evidence of any of these processes being connected to a God, where even if you could say just linguistically, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case when just looking at pure logic. What do we observe in the world as being the case? Like, is there a methodology which can ground God in something concrete? Or is it, in principle, a metaphysical claim that I can't falsify? If it is a metaphysical claim that I can't falsify, then none of what he's saying means anything, like has any kind of relevance.
Yeah.
Because it's just a story. You're looking at some facts in the world and constructing a story.
Yeah, and I said in my opening statement to him, I coined the term, I mean, I coined it, but because he talked about he's looking at a perspective of philosophy of science, and I said, well, it's kind of like the issue of underdetermination in philosophy of science, but yours is just like the problem of metaphysical underdetermination, right? It's I could just say it's a group of cosmic programmers that are trying to simulate life, right? I don't know at what point we have any indication that either of those explanations is favored over the other, right? It seems that we just look at the same data and then kind of work backwards on a conclusion. But
I just want to say, like, so even though we're talking about the morality and all that stuff, I would like to kind of like jump onto another part of the argument later on in a few minutes, maybe.
For Witter has a point you might need to clarify on. I know that what I make the distinction for is that I'm kind of heavily into the analytic side of philosophy. You're probably more on the continental side of philosophy, I would assume. I mean, you still.
I'm right in between.
I would say you're probably in between is a fair assessment, but you aren't as convinced by kind of the issues with like how we derive normativity with logic, right?
Yeah, I'm not convinced. Right.
Yeah.
So here's an example. I mean, I guess you can say like when we use induction, it's a kind of logic, but there's nothing about how do I say this? There's nothing about my prior experience of the past that can give me certainty that the future is going to be the same. So the sun is going to rise tomorrow. Like I have an experience of it rising from yesterday, and I make an inference that the sun will rise tomorrow. But there's nothing about that is confined by the logic, right? Like logic on its own is not going to be enough to tell me that the sun rising a certain way is dependent on any kind of logic. It's just a fact of reality that are you following what I'm saying? I feel like I'm not explaining this very well. I'm trying to think of a more clear example.
I somewhat understand your take on it. This is kind of where me and you need to get onto the part 3 conversation on morality, because that was kind of our hang up. And then biblical account for the win. There's a thing that scrolls at the bottom of every episode if we remember to click the button. It's axioms on trial at Gmail. I almost said axioms of trial. Axioms on trial at gmail.com. You can email us there. Also a good time to plug that if you like what you're watching, you want to support us, you can go to Axioms on Trial or patreon.com/axioms on trial, as well as where else can we? I guess that's really all we have set up right now there. Or you can just subscribe or like it. So there you go.
Yeah. Okay, maybe this might be a better example. Is there anything restricted by logic itself that tells me that if I cut off my hand, that it's going to hurt me?
There's an issue with ascribing the value or attitude of a desire towards that, right? Like there's no way that I could logically prescribe whether I should have or shouldn't have or should have reacted when it, like even if I cut my hand, there's no way to get to the logical inference that I should cry, right? I don't even think that I don't even think you get there, right? Exhibiting those. Maybe you do in the terms of like you just take is statements and go, if you cut some, part of your flesh, then typically this is a biological response or something. Like I get that,
right. So which is kind of what
is statements,
right? So which is kind of where I'm heading. But I would also want to say that for me, language is secondary to phenomena. So any kind of logic you can construct is always going to be limited by the limitations of language and the gap between language and the phenomenon we can observe and experience. So you may be right that we can't derive the value through the lens of logic, but it doesn't mean that the value ceases to be part of the experience reality.
Sure. We'll have to table this, but I want to respond at least to the part or to the perspective of language kind of being secondary. I get that 100%, but I still think language has the function of prescribing something much different when discussing moral facts than kind of discussing other types of natural facts in the world. I think that there's a distinction.
I think that's the fundamental disagreement.
I in that little brief conversation, I think that does kind of hit the nail on the head. Because there's parts of where like I get your position, but I think it's the distinction of you're essentially wanting to call any of the aughts claims is claims, or at least argue for that essentially, and that But then I'm kind of wondering if then logic's not an issue for you because there just is statements. It's just the language applied within the logic.
We'll definitely revisit this in part 3.
That. That's probably one of my favorite conversations to have. I can riff on that like all day. So,
just to respond to biblical account, we'll have to set up a specific day for you to come on. Can be any day this week, probably. Just email us. For the time being, I think we're kind of getting through this, responding to this video.
Yeah, just email me or email the link at the bottom, or I think Witter just provided it, and we can have you on. I would like, if you do have any content that you can send, I don't prefer to just blindly put people on just in case, because we've had people in the community come on to StreamYard and then post like graphical things on there to get their account banned or lose monetization and these types of things. And so I have to vet if I don't really know you. The only people we don't really vet before are the professors we've had on, because their name kind of speaks for itself. But anyway, yeah. So if you can provide some bit of content, so at least I'm not just blindly going into a conversation with some stranger on the internet, where they could just post a bunch of shit on my live stream. So anyway, that all out of the way.
If you guys want to close those thoughts on that, because I would like to focus a little bit more in the evidence of the fine tuning and all that stuff, rather than
sure.
You know, talking about the morality and all those things. Because I think
well, if I can interrupt real fast, Santi, Travis, I thought that was part of like your argument. So if like that's important to you, then you know I don't want to take that away from your arguments. I feel like that would be kind of undercutting what you're prepared for.
No, so okay. Now here's the thing: when we talk about sample sizes, that's why I'm saying, like, look, you can compare different types of life, like bacteria, plants and animals, advanced like Homo sapiens, and then intelligent moral agents who have the capacity to launch a high-tech global civilization. And with the increasing complexity and precision that increases with each category, that gives us a testing measure to detect intentionality. Like it takes more precision for the evolution of embodied moral agents. And then not only that, but we have like consciousness. And when I posit theistic idealism, it's not the universe plus God, it's all of reality that's deducible to the mind of God. And so I'm not positing extra brute facts. And so theistic idealism is going to have less.
That makes no sense. There's nothing about the increasing levels there that contribute to any notion. You're not testing for intentionality. There's no test there for intentionality. You're literally making up a metaphysical category and saying that that's what's going on. You haven't tested for that as being the factor. So I mean, what was it the last thing he said? He said everything being reducible to the mind of God. Again, how is that? It's still just a claim. Like I can just say everything is reducible to physics. I mean, we can all do that. Everything is reducible to physics and the natural order, and that doesn't require any kind of intentionality. So
yeah, the established intentionality part always seems to be
it's assumed, it's not tested, and it's not
it's just
justified.
It's baked in, but it's the thing that's like I care the most about, because I've told a lot of theists this in Discord conversations. It's like, look, man, we can save a lot of the headache, and I can grant, whatever you want to grant up until we get to intentionality.
Right.
Even if I don't agree with certain contingency arguments, like for the sake of it, it's like, let's just grant it, but I don't ever get to intention. Every time I push as hard as I can, it's like never can get there.
That's brute facts in that sense, the naturalism. And I think it's a good explanation, because if God, under the proposition that God exists, if he's a moral agent, then it's moderately probable he's going to create moral agents. And so, I think the fine-tuning evidence would be an expected matter of course under theism, whereas in naturalism, this level of complexity for intelligent agents is quite surprising.
Sure, but based on what?
But also based on what is he judging God as a moral agent? That is literally begging the question. Like, on what grounds you're saying what is moral? Because of what God says is moral? Is that part of his nature, or just a commandment making subjective to God's desires? Like, he's just assuming ontology left and right,
I think it's worse than that, in that it seems that he's baked in a position that can only be defended in virtue of a necessitarian position. Like that's, and someone else can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't get the main argument for this intentionality baked with the constants having to be a specific way. Everything seems to have this has to be a specific way, and then it leads me back to the whole I don't get why God is specifically that way, or what.
And also, if anything, God is not a moral agent, because God clearly is not a moral agent, given what takes place in the Old Testament.
Yes, and so I mean, and CJ brings up, it's like I hate the fine tuner because I think that was like Dawkins, and I'm not a big fan of Dawkins' arguments usually in this realm. But it just begs the question to me of like, why isn't it fine tuned for black holes or fine tuned for anything else, especially when you compare the significance of life. But beyond that, it's like, I don't get if it's a moral, agent, it would create that. Well, that just backs me up to like why it is that way, given the fact that you've introduced all these limitations. Like, it has to work with these physical constants in a specific way. It can't make the mass of a neutrino the mass of a basketball. It couldn't do that. And just, to me, it just seems to set up God is brutally this way with no explanation. And then I don't know why someone can't just kind of shave that off and go, the universe is brute with these constants, and then your theory is simpler and it actually explains things and doesn't add some extra baggage. But anyway.
But this is also theologically problematic, because if we are fine-tuned to be moral agents, how does he explain the sin is a thing? How does he explain the purpose of hell and heaven? How does he explain the fact that most people don't behave morally, and what we see in the world are often a failure for morality? If we are specifically tuned to only be a certain kind of way, like on a naturalistic perspective, I can explain those things. But
the atheist.
I was waiting for Tangent just to show up and say something dumb. Perfect.
Great. I'm sorry, I like that comment a lot. That's actually the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. A wild Otangelo just appears. Atheists are finally tuned to talk nonsense all the time. I don't know why. I thought that was so funny. If you actually go back and watch this debate, there's a part where Otangelo says in the live chat, he goes, "Wow, I actually agree with Jmike." So I wonder what part was nonsense and wasn't. But and guys, I don't know why that made me laugh so hard. That if everyone should also go account, then that's even better. But I hope it's the real Otangelo.
And everyone should go watch the conversation that we had with Otangelo, because
that was
hilarious.
That was
But I'm not going to make any further comments.
Yeah,
I don't want to be too mean.
Yeah.
All right, let's move forward.
All right, we got some time left, so let's do this. But if now we've like kind of focused on aspects of morality, or even like say you were saying you were going to present some something about God being necessary, right, or maximally great being, and so you use like a modal ontological argument. Well, then I don't feel like we need the fine tuning argument, because you would just have convinced me from the aspects of.
So if he's a moral agent, then it's moderately probable he's going to create moral agents. And so, I think the fine tuning evidence would be
arguing for fine tuning at that point.
No, okay. So it's basically saying that God, as a moral agent, it would be moderately probable that he would want to create moral agents. And so if he intends to create moral agents in a moral theater, where we can make these morally significant decisions under the posture, just branded theism, okay. It would be probable that he would create us, right? And so we can test this by looking at the increasing precision with each category. So it's like a way of measuring the intentionality, like I was saying. And when we talk about not having sample sizes, that's what I'm laying out those for, is those categories. We can look at the increasing complexity of those categories, which gives us a way to detect intentionality.
Okay, I'm wondering how we declare intentionality, right? Because the moral naturalist, again, is going to say, that these processes unguided that get us to natural facts of the world, prescribing normativity, how we ought to behave. They're not going to look at that and go, because they're looking at the same exact data as you, right? And then they're going, this is what I said in my opening statement about it's like a metaphysical underdetermination problem. It's like, I don't see why the moral naturalist, they're going to go, yeah, there's no intentionality in those unguided processes. That's why I don't believe in the God, is because I don't see intentionality. I actually see random means and selection for traits, and then I see normativity arising out of kind of the ashes, so to speak.
Gotcha. So I think theism is, we have these, excuse me, these sets of facts, right? And theism, I think, is going to offer a better explanation of why this should be the case, and it's going to posit less brute facts than that type of naturalism. And it's not just moral agents; it's intelligence, consciousness, and everything. And theism can explain why we have this. Theism can explain the data that we have.
Okay. So the issue that I have is that, right, like you. And I want to see if you agree or on this, or what your take is. But when you go into here, I want to see the last statement so I don't word it wrong. I keep going back too far. Mutations in selection for traits, and then I see normativity arising out of kind of.
This is not going to be expected. It's going to be improbable that
that it can be explained. My issue is not about like I can explain things with any theory I want, which is kind of the issue I rose about, kind of metaphysical underdetermination, right? It's like I can take the same data and then try to explain it. And whether it's successful or not might be one thing, but it also has to have a trade-off between simplicity, right? There has to be some kind of trade-off between like, for example, we can both explain the same thing. If he talks about his God being necessary and I say the universe is necessary, or however we go, mine explains everything but more simple, and then I don't have to add this extra thing of why God created constants some way. I can just say these are just brute that way. I don't add some extra ontological basis, which I don't want in my worldview if it's unnecessary. So it doesn't matter if you add an extra thing that explains it, right? You could say, well, God created this other demigod, which created the constants. It's like, right, you don't want to keep just adding those things unnecessarily, which is kind of the argument I was trying to make. But anyway, I didn't know what your take is on.
I think you're doing a really good job in this conversation with him at exposing the fact that he's just making assumptions and saying this has to be the case, when, like you just said, naturalists can look at the same data and say, you haven't shown intention here. You're assuming it. You're doing a good job at really showing the flaws of his approach. I do want to mention one thing, though. So if that is who I think it is,
I think that's Travis, the one I think I'm debating. My screen is like this big on StreamYard, so I can't really see, but I see it says Travis.
Oh, I'm talking about the Swinburne, or how you pronounce his name.
Yeah,
or are you saying that's the guy you debated?
I can see the Travis part, but the part underneath it, I wasn't reading.
Okay,
it's really
I mean, I have
to look at the chat to read chat text.
Yeah, I've read a good amount of Christian apologetics, and it's I would be happy probably to go through a series, maybe talking about him and some other ones.
Yeah, that'd be great.
When they are severely flawed philosophically on all fronts. But okay, Travis, cool. Thanks for stopping by. No, I'll just say the same thing that I've been saying, and I'm glad that I get to say it to where you can hear it. It seems to me that you are assuming intentionality. You made a claim in this conversation that is observing the complexity is a test for intentionality. That's not the case, because the complexity can be also explained through other means. So this entire time, you are assuming certain things that you haven't actually provided the justification for. You haven't bridged the gap between your metaphysics and what's actually legitimate in believing. So here's an interesting comment. Recent insights show that the more you fine-tune one constant, the less likely life is. The less you fine tune it, then the more likely life is. So our notions of likelihood might be flawed.
That's interesting. That is, if anyone's curious on who that is.
Also, let me clarify, Spartan. Now, I'm not saying that he's wrong in all aspects of philosophy. I'm saying that apologetics in general, as I've seen it, I think is fundamentally flawed. And Travis, I have to disagree. I don't think you gave a way to test your claims. Because I think this assumption of intentionality is unfalsifiable. You're looking at complexity and jumping to intentionality when it's not the only explanation. I can look at it, in fact, as Mike was saying in your conversation, I can look at the complexity and have a different perspective on what resulted in the complexity without having to add the assumption that God was responsible. And the claim that this is all somehow theistic. What's the term they used? Theistic. What was it? Idealism is a simpler explanation. I think it is. Again, I don't know what to do with that, because I think idealism makes more assumptions and creates more philosophical problems than physicalism does.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, and I know Travis saying in the comments about that he cares about theoretical virtues, and yeah, but the issue is that I don't even have to contest explanation, because I mean we can just assert that something explains it, like this thing I have at the back end explains it, bruteness of constants or God or whatever. I care about simplicity, and then what kind of a posteriori considerations actually indicate the explanation in the first place, not just like the theoretical virtues, almost a priori, just kind of putting it together. It seems that the evidence needs to lead it, whereas it seems that we're stuck in this working backwards, because I don't know that theists are convinced from. I guess I'd take the Oppie position, right? I don't think there's a silver bullet that a theist is going to hear that an atheist is just going to, I'm a Christian now, and I don't think it works the other way. So I think theoretical virtue helps in terms of looking at something, kind of seeing, depth and breadth of explanation versus simplicity. But the problem is that like if that doesn't have any actual like implication towards something that we don't even know is a candidate explanation, like that's when I can't just say that that has a better theoretical virtue, because I don't even know how it's a candidate explanation in the first place if all the a posteriori or the evidence, those considerations just assume that. They assume intentionality, or they assume a God, or whatever it might be, right?
Real quick, because I don't want to get stuck in tangential back and forth, but I do have to respond to this. That all the physics, the Big Bang, the fundamental force of the universe, blah blah blah, are all finely tuned. Why? Again, this is just a claim. The fact that things are the way they are and have the conditions that they have doesn't mean they were tuned. Doesn't prove intention. The fact that if the constants were different, we might not have life, doesn't prove that those conditions were set in place. These are all assumptions you're making for a larger narrative that you need to tell yourself. That's it. The science is not in your favor. Let's move forward.
The universe should be tuned
Whoops.
for the existence of human bodies.
But I think in tandem to your argument, especially going to like embodied moral agents, in a naturalist world, you would expect to see this mishmash of moral ideals that are entirely contradictory to each other, which like I think was it Mackey, it's like, what does a moral fact even look like at that point? We don't, that's what is kind of the queerness argument. It's like, what would that even look like? I'm not sure like how we go. That leap to me seems a little odd. I don't know how you justify it to say that it would be more probable under theism. I don't know how we. So I got a little confused in my own speaking there. The point that I was trying to draw there is like, I kind of went back a further step because it clicked in my head when he talked about like God being a moral agent and would want to give moral agency, and then that shows intentionality and stuff. What clicked in my head was like, well, what about moral disagreement, right? Which is like a huge topic in metaethics. Like, does moral disagreement, the fact that we have just this vast array of disagreement on normativity or oughts or what you should do,
Right.
like, does that have any implication as evidence for like the anti-realist? I'm not someone that takes that.
Yeah,
as like,
I don't think it does.
We've discussed that on the show, even
Yeah.
me as an anti-realist. I don't think that's necessarily like a great argument, but at the same time, if you are using, if it's coming down to this consideration that this moral agent endowed everybody with this moral agency, like, why is everything, to me, the way you would see a naturalist world, which is a mishmash of different moral obligations that coincide with cultures,
But also,
and things that are related to the groups of people that interact, as opposed to it being like part of us. And now me and you get into a disagreement because you probably find objective
right.
obligations and things, but that's a separate.
But the problem too, obviously from my perspective, is that I think I have a grounding for morality that I can actually provide a more concrete definition. I mean, he's attributing these words to God and to us, like moral agents. How are you defining morality from your perspective? I think the theist fails to be able to do that ultimately. I think it is the theist perspective that is actually subjective. And it is the theistic perspective that either begs the question or is only an additional assumption that is unnecessary. I just don't see how he makes the leaps that he does. Like, how can we even? I mean, was this addressed in the conversation? Like, what is defining as morality?
No, I mean,
because he says, yeah, I literally covered that in my conversation.
I really don't think so. I mean, I'm not going to like just die in a ditch and say, Travis is wrong or something. I don't. He could be right. I don't think that we really defined it. I brought up normativity. He didn't seem to have an issue with that being a non-negotiable feature in his thesis of metaethics, and I thought that was enough, right? I think that if we just have established some kind of normative behavior as part of your, baked into your morality, then sure.
Gotcha.
I think this is a really bad critique. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course.
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't expect you.
Yeah, right.
I don't know why you felt the need to like project that, but yeah, we would assume you wouldn't agree.
I mean, otherwise you wouldn't have those.
It would be like me. It'd be like me saying, "I don't really think God exists." By the way, Travis, like, yes, of course, that's what Mike thinks. Have the data for that, given that we don't have a candidate explanation to begin with.
Well, that's why I'm applying the theoretical virtues to it. We run it. We can absolutely use these theoretical virtues in metaphysics. So I'm using like the principles of the philosophy of science and applying it metaphysically of why we have this reality. And I'm offering it as the best explanation, because under the proposition, and I don't want to keep repeating this, but under the proposition that God is moral agent, it's probable he would want to bring it about. And if he intends to bring it about, we have the kind of evidence that we have. And so it offers the best explanation.
Yeah. And so I hit on what you're saying with, you're kind of looking at it from philosophy of science, but I guess I'm highlighting a problem in philosophy of science, which is just just a simple problem of underdetermination, right? Like, I don't know, like, in virtue of what is theism more, because you're saying like intentionality, but the moral naturalists would just deny that. They go, yeah, I don't see intentionality there. That has to be demonstrated. And so if you're saying in virtue of that, then what is the novel prediction that shows the intentionality? Because I don't know how we measure something like that. And to back up and maybe to help Travis on the point, since he's in the comments, or at least understand what the critique is, you haven't satisfied. You've just assumed intentionality within normativity in the world, or that it's from this moral agent, but you haven't satisfied, like Cease, for example. Like, I don't think there's normativity in the world, but you have not satisfied, if I just a grant that it exists in the world, right? I try to just give you as much to play with. You've done nothing to actually separate the issue of the question, which is you just beg the question to say, well, moral facts show intentionality, and then what do you say, Cease?
That
they don't.
intentionality is right. I don't see
Right?
that. That's just
Exactly. That's not what you see. But for him to just say that, well, this shows that, is just begging the question or restating the claim. So that's the issue. Is that, I should have probably been more blunt about it, but it's even more of an issue when it's like you're just using the same data and then coming to a different conclusion. Hence this in a sense is a meta-ethical problem of underdetermination. But
and the problem is that, at least from my perspective, I have a methodology grounded in empiricism. I have a methodology that can make predictions. I have a methodology that's starting from the ground up, not working backwards.
Yeah. Especially if you look at the perspective that, like, if I'm going to move to you or Travis's position, right? Like, I'm probably going to I'm not even going to get to God and say, okay, morals exist, because I don't know how that logically follows. You could just have a God that is absent of moral obligation or care. Two, I'm going to have to get to like this gradients of like, okay, now I'm a moral realist, right? But like nowhere in there, like that's like a first step. Even if we just say, if God exists, then there has to be morality. Like if we have that entailment, well, like I'm looking at your guys' position and I go, well, it seems it's more honest for you to go, I've decided that normativity exists. There are moral facts. Right. Whereas like the theist isn't doing that. They're kind of just like, I've accepted God exists. I've accepted normativity. And then everything starts there. Right.
Right.
So, and that's more of an, also, sorry, real fast. Another issue I have is that nowhere in the conversation did I get really the God that Travis, I feel like, believes in. Right. There's nothing at the front end in terms of the constants that were related to why it must be a triune God, why the God must have died on a cross, all these things, right? I get this very austere version of theism or of God. And my thing is, I kind of want to know, the whole picture before I even try to tell you whether or not it's simpler or not, or because it seems to me you're not offering up the entire picture. It would be as if I offered up some very kind of like bland vanilla version of naturalism, but didn't give you my actual commitments, right?
I just want to reply to this real quick. He says there's more fine-tuning that goes into the evolution of humans to make moral decisions, like launch a global civilization is more precise than fine-tuning for any other phenomena. All of that are just claims. Like, how would we compare one fine-tuning being more than another? What do you mean by morality? How are you not just assuming fine-tuning as an explanation, as opposed to what as a better explanation, in contrast with what the naturalists are going to use to explain something like morality and something like the development of global civilizations? I think the theistic perspective complicates things. It doesn't make it easier.
And I would agree. Yeah, the fine tuning. I don't know if who you're responding to there specifically, but the fine tuning is a separate argument, which was weird. Why we went into, which is the whole point of me focusing on morality here, was that it was like you're saying things that the moral naturalist is just going to go no, in virtue of what is that claim true, as opposed to me just saying it's some feature of a natural fact, right? That need not some God.
To observe the constants being what they are, and the brute fact that if you change the constants, we would find ourselves in a different universe, does not on its own imply anything about fine-tuning. It doesn't imply anything about intention or design or will or any. That's something that you are assuming metaphysically. I can grant the fact that, if things were slightly different, that a lot, maybe life wouldn't exist. Sure. That doesn't help you one iota. in your assumption of God?
Well, so, yeah, sorry. I had a brain fart because I had realized that I just was talking about that. So yes, it actually does matter, because especially when your argument and the theoretical virtues kind of rest upon bruteness, well, then there's a lot of the properties of the God that I'm not aware of. And if we're talking about why something's fine-tuned, we need to further the question of why the God is the way it is. And if you just go to, it's just necessarily that way, but have a problem with me just stating and hiving that off and saying that the universe is brute, these constants are just have to be that way, then we have a major problem that you're not seeing, because the desires of the God of why it creates this universe, whether over another, or why it even was fine-tuned itself to create life, all that is a question in terms of why you get the end product. You have to kick the can down the road to show that, but yeah, so it does matter whether those properties exist. If you remove them from the picture, I don't think it's a really fair. It's a typical theist thing to do. I get it. I'm never going to have somebody incorporate those properties or attributes into just their like deistic arguments, essentially. But outside of our physical brains, which you're arguing is kind of not part of your framework, because intentionality is before the fact that we have brains, which just seems backwards to me.
No, okay, so I can get into consciousness if you want. I'm an idealist. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but no, when you say, the problem of underdetermination, that's why I'm looking at it I'm trying to apply it through the theoretical virtues, and I think we have the best explanation, given that criteria. And then there's also with the increasing.
The theoretical virtues don't resolve the underdetermination of theories. Like that, I don't know what is meant by that.
Well, let me real quick respond. Of course, naturalists can do that. Posit that too. Yes, if you're talking about positing like why, or just saying in terms of that the universe is brute, or that's not the issue. Is actually looking at what your argument commits you to, right? Like, I take the naturalist aside for a second. Just look at your argument when you say, with your argument about like intentionality or morals, there's a further question of why God has the intentions, why the God is tuned to have those intentions. Furthermore, why is it limited by the constants on that, right? Your theory seems to raise issues to the entity itself of limitations, and then why it has its intentionality. And if you just say that they're brute, then it seems to rub up against a different issue if somebody else comes to you and says, well, my theory is brute, the universe is necessary. And then when we look at it for the theory, and one's more simple than the other, I don't know how you argue yours is better.
But I gotta jump in here, because I'm extremely uncomfortable with how the word theory here is being used, because he's not provided a theory. A theory isn't just a hypothesis or a potential. Like, the theism, physicalism doesn't just have a narrative. It has an ability to make novel predictions. Idealism doesn't. Idealism is after the fact creating a narrative that cannot be falsified. So I don't see any actual theories being presented here. I see a story. I see a narrative. And I see one that is full of assumptions and we're asking to show or to prove intentionality, and in reality it's just being assumed in the whole package of what's being presented. You look at complexity and you assume that entails intentionality. That doesn't follow. That's not how that works. You see complexity and you assume design. You see the ability to make moral decisions and you assume that must have been given by a moral agent. None of those things you've justified. Not in any way. I don't know that he knows what underdetermination of theories means. I don't know what that response was. I think you think this might be a good place to maybe end it.
Oh yeah, we could pause because I think we'll let's see where we're at. 44. Yeah, we're at an hour and 40. Yeah, it's about a good time. We usually end about 1:30.
Hey, no
I did-
disrespect to the guy. I mean, I don't
no,
have any-
no, nothing.
but-
No disrespect at all. Travis was actually one of the better people I've talked to, and I stated that to him, and I appreciate the fact that he looks at things in science. I think that's great, as opposed to just you know, not doing that, which it seems that's what a lot of theists want to do. But yeah, so yeah, it's, you know, anyone that we do reviews on or anything like that, it's nothing personal. It's just about the arguments.
Yeah.
I think you said before you even said anything, I'm sure this guy is a great guy, and he seemed, from my interaction, to be that. But yes, the arguments, I don't feel that. So one, I respect where he's going and the fact that he wants to do this in regard to like theoretical virtues. But two, kind of to your point, yeah, I don't know how this is a theory when I don't have any falsification criterion. And even if we're just going from like simplicity and explanation, I have a problem there because it just rubs up against bruteness for the same reasons that he would contest to the naturalists about the bruteness of the universe. I would have issues of why God is one certain way or has the desires. And then if we're both just stuck there, then there's no argument for simplicity or theoretical virtue on his side, because I just get to hive off one thing. I get to hive off this extra ontological baggage that he has baked into it. And I don't
like
need
before,
it, and it still explains everything.
And idealism is a worse approach to explaining what we're seeing, because it can't make novel predictions the way that physicalism does. So even going from that aspect,
I don't see the logical entailment from idealism to God in the first place.
Right. I mean, that's another thing.
I get that it's an attractive view. Like
all these things are just claims. They're just assumptions from the beginning to the end. They're just stated as being the case.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we'll hopefully we can get a part 2 here.
Sure.
But yeah, kind of what CJ says, right? You literally, I'll put it up on the screen for viewers. You literally posit one less entity to explain the same thing if we're just going to bottom out in bruteness. And that's exactly kind of my point. Is we touched at the beginning as well. It's just, I don't get the positing the desires in any other way that's going to be that, or in any way that's going to be more satisfactory than the naturalist kind of pausing bruteness of the universe or wherever they rest that, right? So, and then it brings into a whole other issue of like brute contingencies with God, which some people might think are good or not good, but that's a separate.
Well, you know how I feel about contingent.
Yeah, exactly. So, and talking in that language in the first place, I think me and Cease will first off say that could be problematic. I kind of don't have a problem talking in that, though I'm very skeptical on modal logic and how we use it with philosophy and at least
it's ironic that
certain axioms like S5 and things like that I'm a little skeptical of. But anyway,
it's ironic though Tanjo in the comment section is talking about arguments from incredulity when his entire existence is grounded in him being incapable of imagining a universe without God.
Yeah.
So.
Tangelo, we'd love to have you back on. I thank you so much. If you guys want to watch me genuinely crack up, it's somewhere in the middle when Tangelo just busts through with the comment that's atheists are fine-tuned to talk nonsense. That was so, oh my God, that was so fucking, that made my day. Yeah, anyway, thank you guys. We had somebody issue wanting to have a conversation with me. I think they're a Christian, biblical count for the win. So I assume hopefully we get them on the show. Cease, anything you want to, well, actually, sorry, before I give you the floor, I want to shout out to through the muck and the mire, my buddy David. We got Mama Bear, CJ, Bob, Otangelo for the one-line zingers tonight. Anyway, yeah, floor is yours, Cease. Close out the show, and yeah,
I'll just say a couple things. I think later this week we'll probably complete the analysis of the debate we had about the Kalam.
Well, we'll probably at least get to before the logic part, which might be either a part 4 or a part 1 of a new series.
I think we were already there. I think we were already at the logic
okay.
part.
Oh, sweet. I forgot where we were at.
So we'll get that done. There's a few other videos. There's a debate that we need to go over between an ex-Muslim and a Muslim. I forget their names at the moment, but that was just mind-boggling. So just a little tease for that. And then, I'll just say thanks everyone as always for tuning in and watching our content. We really appreciate it, and we'll come back with more videos soon.
We will. And for the last comment that Tangela said, walk a very thin line before you get banned in my chats. You have not done anything wrong so far, but I don't know your intentions on that comment, but walk a fine line, because I won't interact. I don't want to be like, I don't want to talk to that person. This person can't call in, anything like that. I don't mind, but I start to get why people don't like to talk to you. And when you make comments that I feel like you're alluding to certain things in favor of your own bigotry, that'll get problematic, and I won't give you any of my time because you just don't deserve it. That said, we love you all. Don't be a douche. Don't be a bigot. Love everybody. Remember, it's not anybody else's fault that you haven't proven evidence that your God exists but you. Sorry, not our problem. Peace.